What if the perfect relationship everyone believed in was quietly falling apart behind closed doors, and no one saw it coming? This season changes everything. Secrets, tension, and truth finally collide. So if you want the real story before anyone else, smash that subscribe button right now and join the fastest growing Inside Scoop community, because you don't want to miss what happens next. The night settled heavily over the Flagstaff house, wrapping every room in a silence that felt too loud to ignore. The kind of silence that does not comfort, but instead forces every thought to the surface. Kody sat at the kitchen island, staring down at the faint reflection of himself in the glass, while Robyn stood a few steps away, watching him closely as if she were trying to understand something that had slowly become unfamiliar between them. The question came quietly, almost like he was unsure if he should ask it. "Are you happy?" And for a brief second, everything seemed to pause. Robyn did not answer right away, and that hesitation carried more weight than any words she could have spoken, because in that moment, it revealed that something inside her was searching for an answer she was not ready to give. She finally spoke, choosing her words carefully, saying that most days she thought she was happy, but there were moments where things felt different. Not wrong, not broken, but not what she had imagined. And that small admission was enough to shift the air between them. Kody nodded slowly, as if he had expected that response, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way he could not avoid. He leaned forward, his voice softer now, asking if she still trusted him after everything, the moves, the decisions, the way things had unfolded with the rest of the family. And Robyn reached for his hand, offering reassurance, but even that gesture carried a trace of uncertainty. She said she trusted his heart, but admitted there were moments when she felt afraid. And those words lingered between them long after they were spoken, because they were not the kind of fears that disappear easily. They had been having conversations like this more often lately, calling them check-ins, convincing themselves it was a sign of strength, that they were communicating openly. But beneath the surface, there was something else. A quiet need for constant reassurance that hinted at cracks they were both trying not to acknowledge. In a truly stable relationship, those questions do not need to be asked so frequently. And yet, here they were, asking them again and again, as if repeating the process could somehow keep everything from falling apart. The house around them stood as a reminder of everything they had built and everything they had lost. Its size once symbolized hope for a large, connected family, but now it felt almost overwhelming, filled with empty rooms that echoed with absence rather than life. Kody began spending more time in the garage, turning it into a place where he could retreat from the emotional weight that seemed to follow him everywhere else. At first, Robyn dismissed it as a harmless habit, something he had always enjoyed, but over time it became clear that it was more than that. It was a pattern. Evenings passed with him outside, working on projects that never seemed to end, while she waited inside, telling herself he would come back soon. Dinners would sit untouched, growing cold as the hours slipped by, and eventually she found herself walking out to the garage more often, not out of curiosity, but out of a need to close the distance that had begun to form between them. She would stand in the doorway watching him, surrounded by tools and unfinished tasks, the bright lights casting shadows across his face. And she would call out his name gently, asking if everything was okay, and he would respond with the same reassurance every time, saying he was just finishing up. But there was always something else that needed to be done, another small task that kept him there a little longer. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the roof, she stayed in the doorway longer than usual, observing him as he sorted through old belongings, photographs from years past, small reminders of a life that once felt full and certain. And in that moment, it became clear that the garage was not just a place for work. It was a place where he could escape from everything that felt unresolved inside the house. She stepped closer, her voice calm but carrying a quiet concern, and asked him what he was thinking about. And he hesitated before admitting that he was thinking about everything, the past, the present, the uncertainty of what their life had become. And then he said something that neither of them could ignore, that living this new version of their relationship was harder than he had expected. Those words hung in the air because they acknowledged a truth they had both been avoiding. Robyn felt a familiar wave of emotion rising inside her, but she held it back, choosing instead to nod as if she understood, even though part of her was struggling to process what it meant. Later, when she was alone, she admitted that his time in the garage made her question whether he was avoiding the house or avoiding her, and that thought stayed with her long after the conversation ended because it introduced a possibility she was not ready to face. The quiet withdrawals were not dramatic. There were no arguments or raised voices, just a gradual shift that created distance in small, almost unnoticeable ways until it became impossible to ignore. And as this pattern continued, another unresolved piece of their past began to surface. The land that had once represented their future, Coyote Pass, after years of delays, disagreements, and shifting plans, was finally being sold, marking the end of a dream that had already faded long before the paperwork was completed. Kody stood there alone one last time, looking out over the land, remembering what it was supposed to be, and realizing that it had become something entirely different, a symbol of what did not work out. When he returned home, the conversation with Robyn was quiet but filled with tension. She acknowledged that it was good to finally move on, but there was an underlying sense that moving on didn't erase everything that had happened. Questions about fairness, trust, and past decisions began to resurface, bringing with them emotions that had never been fully resolved. Kody tried to explain his actions, insisting that he had always been trying to find solutions that worked for everyone. But Robyn gently challenged him, asking whether those solutions had truly been fair. And while her tone remained calm, there was a new honesty in her words, one that showed she was beginning to look at their past with a different perspective. She admitted that she trusted him to handle everything at the time, believing he had the best intentions. But now she wondered if that trust had prevented her from seeing things more clearly. And that realization created a subtle shift in their dynamic, because it meant she was no longer simply accepting everything without question. Kody seemed surprised by this change, not because it was confrontational, but because it was different from what he was used to. And as they continued to talk, it became clear that the end of one chapter was forcing them to reevaluate everything that came before it. Meanwhile, Kody himself was going through a transformation of his own. Feeling the weight of his past decisions, he decided to confront them directly, embarking on a journey to apologize to the people he felt he had hurt. Each conversation brought its own challenges. Some offered a sense of closure, while others highlighted the distance that could not be repaired. But through it all, he began to understand the impact of his actions in a way he had not before. When he returned home, he shared this realization with Robyn, telling her that out of everyone, she was the one he owed the most apology to because she had remained by his side through everything, absorbing the emotional fallout. Without ever walking away, and while his words were sincere, they also carried a recognition that staying had come with its own cost. Robyn listened, her emotions difficult to hide, because hearing that acknowledgement validated what she had felt for a long time. But it also raised new questions about what their relationship needed moving forward. They were no longer dealing with the same circumstances that had once defined them, and without that structure, they had to figure out how to connect in a way that felt genuine and sustainable. Their attempts to rebuild were real, but they were also fragile, shaped by everything that had happened, and everything they were still trying to understand. Even moments meant to bring them closer carried an undercurrent of uncertainty, because neither of them could ignore the changes that had taken place. One afternoon, they decided to step away from the house and spend time together outdoors, hoping the change of environment would help them reconnect. As they rode through the trails, there was a brief sense of freedom, a reminder of simpler times when things felt less complicated. But that moment was short-lived, as a sudden miscalculation caused everything to shift in an instant. The vehicle tipped, the world turning chaotic for a brief second that felt much longer. And when it stopped, the silence that followed was filled with fear. Robyn rushed to him, her focus entirely on making sure he was okay. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the tension, not the unresolved questions, just the immediate need to be there for each other. Kody looked at her, his usual confidence replaced by vulnerability, and he asked for forgiveness, not just for what had just happened, but for everything leading up to it. And while she reassured him and helped him back on his feet, the emotional impact of that moment lingered because it highlighted how quickly things could change and how important it was to face what they had been avoiding. As they returned home, the conversation continued, deeper than before, because the experience had stripped away any remaining barriers, forcing them to confront the reality of their situation. They both wanted to make things work, that much was clear. But wanting something is not always enough. It requires effort, understanding, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. And as they sat together that evening, the question that remained unspoken but deeply felt was whether they could truly rebuild something strong from what was left, or if the distance that had grown between them would continue to expand, despite their efforts. The morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of the Flagstaff house, casting long, quiet shadows across the floor, as if even the sunlight understood that something inside this home had shifted. The energy felt different, not loud, not broken, but undeniably changed. Robyn moved slowly through the kitchen, her thoughts heavier than usual as her eyes drifted back to the manila folder, resting on the counter, untouched for days. It had been sitting there like a silent reminder of everything they had just closed and everything that still felt unfinished. Kody stood nearby, pouring himself a glass of water, his movements deliberate, almost mechanical, as if he was trying to avoid drawing attention to the tension that neither of them had addressed yet. The air between them carried a quiet weight, the kind that builds when conversations are postponed for too long and truths wait patiently to be acknowledged. Robyn finally stepped forward, her hand hovering over the folder for a brief moment before she opened it. The papers inside were neatly organized, numbers, lines, signatures, all representing the final outcome of years of planning, hoping, and struggling. She scanned the page slowly, her expression calm, but her thoughts racing as she took in what it all meant. The land was gone, the dream was officially over, and while the financial outcome was clear, the emotional impact was far more complicated. She traced her finger along the lines where the shares were divided equally among the four names, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and herself, and she exhaled quietly, not in relief, but in recognition that something significant had ended. Kody glanced at her, waiting for a reaction, but she did not look up right away. Instead, she closed the folder, gently placing it back on the counter, as if she needed a moment to process everything before speaking. "It is really done," she said, finally, her voice steady, but carrying an undertone of something deeper, something unresolved. Kody nodded, confirming what they both already knew, but his response lacked the sense of closure that one might expect, because deep down he understood that this was not just about land or money, it was about everything that had led them to this point. Robyn leaned against the counter, her gaze distant as she spoke again, this time more thoughtfully. "People are going to keep talking about it," she said, not accusing, not emotional, just honest about the reality they could not escape. The conversations, the opinions, the assumptions about how things had been handled, who benefited, who sacrificed, and whether everything had truly been fair. Kody reacted quickly, his tone defensive as he insisted that everything had been done with good intentions, that he had tried to manage a difficult situation in the best way possible. But Robyn did not respond immediately. She let his words settle before speaking again, her voice calm, but carrying a quiet strength that had become more noticeable lately. She admitted that at the time she had trusted him completely. She had believed in his decisions and followed his lead without hesitation, because that was what she thought she was supposed to do. But now, looking back, she realized that trust without questions can sometimes leave gaps in understanding, and those gaps can grow into doubts over time. Kody listened, his expression shifting slightly as he recognized that this was not just an attack, but rather an honest reflection, one that he had not fully considered before. Robyn continued explaining that she had always wanted fairness, that she had tried to advocate for everyone involved, but she also acknowledged that she had not always spoken up when it mattered most, And that realization was not about blame, it was about growth. It was about understanding how their past choices were shaping their present reality. The conversation unfolded slowly, each word carrying meaning, each pause allowing space for the truth to settle. And as they stood there in the house that represented both their achievements and their challenges, it became clear that this moment was about more than just revisiting the past. It was about redefining how they would move forward from it. Kody took a step closer, his voice softer now as he tried to bridge the emotional distance that had formed between them. He reminded her of everything they had built together, the home, the life, the commitment that had kept them together through so many changes. But Robyn did not immediately agree. She acknowledged what they had built, but she also pointed out that building something does not erase the cost of how it was built. And that statement lingered in the air because it carried a truth that neither of them could deny. The past could not be changed, but it could be understood, and learning from it required honesty from both of them. Something new, something that acknowledged their past while allowing them to move forward in a way that felt authentic and sustainable. Every conversation, every shared moment, every challenge they faced became an opportunity to strengthen their connection or to learn from what did not work. And while the outcome of their story remained uncertain, one thing was clear. They were no longer avoiding the truth. They were facing it together, step by step. And in doing so, they were giving themselves a chance to build a future that was not defined by what they had lost, but by what they were willing to create moving forward.